Good afternoon, everyone. For those of you who don't know me, I am Ned Pettis. I'm the Director of Public Safety, and I oversee the divisions of Fire, the Division of Police, and the Division of Support Services. In the Division of Police, Chief Quinlan reports to me. I report to Mayor Ginther, and Mayor Ginther reports to the people of Columbus. We are all working toward the same ultimate vision, public safety that does not just meet, but exceeds community expectations. In regard to police, we are moving away from an old model of law enforcement to a new model in which every person in every neighborhood feels protected. As Mayor Ginther has said, change is hard, progress is messy, but we are committed to doing the work. And with that, it is my honor to introduce to you Mayor Andrew Ginther.
Thank you, Director, and good afternoon, neighbors. I'm excited to join you today to give you an update and talk a little bit about our continued work on justice, reform, and oversight. As you all know, the last few weeks we have made concrete steps toward police reform, real change, not talk, not promises, but action and progress. Today, I'm announcing more details in our work. Like you, I've seen images and videos over the last several weeks that disturb me, including the pepper sprayer of nonviolent activists, media, and elected officials. Some of these images and videos don't live up to our community's expectations or my expectations as your mayor. We know that on June 4th, we set up a hotline outside the chain of command to accept complaints about the Division of Police, specifically in regards to the recent protests in our city. A deputy director, assistant director, and a community faith leader have been reviewing these complaints, all folks outside of the chain of command. We are now hiring 2 independent entities to address the complaints against officers that require administrative review or criminal review. The firm of BakerHostetler will handle the cases that require administrative action. These are actions that are outside of police policy and open for discipline within the Division of Police. A total of approximately 40 incidents so far will be referred to BakerHostetler. In addition, we are engaging a professional investigator, a retired FBI agent, to investigate incidents that may result in criminal charges. A total of 16 incidents thus far have been referred for criminal review. Many incidents from the hotline are still under initial investigation by public safety. And there are additional complaints that have come into the IAB, the Internal Affairs Bureau, that are also still being reviewed. It is likely that more will be forwarded to BakerHostetler and the city's investigator for administrative and criminal review. In addition, today I am seating the Workgroup to structure a civilian review board, a recommendation from the Columbus Community Safety Advisory Commission, and a recommendation that I have heard loud and clear from the community. This, like many other actions, we said we would seat the group by July 1st. And it's critically important in all times, but particularly in times like these, that you follow through and act on what you've committed to do for reform. The work group will study best practices used in other cities and bring back the civilian review board that works best for Columbus. But let me be clear. I will demand that whatever form and structure they recommend, that it must have real authority, including the strongest subpoena and investigation powers under the law. It must have subpoena power and the strongest investigation powers allowed under the law in order to provide the oversight and accountability we need. In creating this work group, I selected subject matter experts and key community stakeholders who will help guide important decisions, including how the board will be seated, how it will operate, and what powers will be afforded to the board. The members of this work group are the following: Jasmine Ayers, a community organizer with the People's Justice Project; Fred Benton, an attorney here in Columbus; Bo Chilton, President and CEO of Impact Community Action; Stephanie Hightower, President and CEO of the Columbus Urban League; Pastor Frederick Lamar, President of the Baptist Pastors Conference; Kent Marcus, General and Bar Counsel to the Columbus Bar Association; Jonathan McCombs, Dean of the College of Health and Public Administration at Franklin University; Ismail Mohammed, who's an attorney, the Ismail Law Office; Denzel Porteous, Chair of the Create Columbus Commission, Interim Director of Stonewall Columbus; Asleen Rodriguez, Director of Government Affairs for the Central Ohio Transit Authority; Janae Stevens, who's President of the John Mercer Langston Bar Association and an associate at Voyers, Sater, Seymour, and Pease; Kyle Strickland, Senior Legal Analyst with the Kerwin Institute; Aaron Sink, Director of Government Relations for the LNE Group; Nana Watson, President of the NAACP Columbus; and Anthony Wilson, who represents he's the President of the National Organization of Black Law Enforcement, Columbus chapter, and he's a retired Columbus and Westerville police officer. Again, I challenge the FOP to join the community in demanding change and reform. This review board is what the community is demanding and what it deserves. In one way or another, we will seat a civilian review board for the city of Columbus. I'd also like to take a moment to clarify any confusion about this work group and the work of the Chiefs Advisory Council that we announced last week, a few weeks ago. The scope of this work group is limited to recommendations on the Civilian Review Board. Once the board is formed and seated, the work group will no longer exist. But the Chiefs Advisory Panel is a wide-ranging and ongoing engagement. Its purpose is to serve as a sounding board and guide for the chief regarding community needs, concerns, and expectations, and for the community to derive direct feedback to the chief on police policies and their impact on neighborhoods. They will be working with the chief to change our policies to make sure they're meeting the community's expectations. The chief has the complete authority and ability to change policies to make sure that our policies and procedures meet and exceed the community's expectations. And some of the first issues that we will have this group advise the chief on around policy is around large crowds, use of chemical agents, and non-violent protests. So with that, I will be happy to take some questions.
Mayor, just for clarity's sake, you mentioned 40 incidents that are being sent to the law firm, 16 incidents that are being reviewed for potential criminal charges. Are you able to say with specificity what were those incidents in terms of date, time, place? What exactly did you see that raised concern?
Well, a number of things, and I can't talk about specific incidents since they're under investigation right now. What was important for me to share with the community is that action is taking place, that there is progress being made on these investigations, and that there are at least 40 that have been referred to BakerHostetler for administrative review, and 16 at this point that this former FBI agent, retired FBI agent, will take a look at for criminal review.
And can you say who that FBI agent is? Or
We're
how-
finalizing the details of the contract, and as soon as that is finalized, we'll be happy to share their name and credentials.
Same was true for the law firm. How were they selected? Did they have city contracts, or, people at home may wonder, is this a group whose partners may have donated to the city or your campaign?
They currently represent the city in all of our labor negotiations, and so they're very familiar with our policies, procedures, and collective bargaining agreements, and so they made the most sense.
So it was a bid then?
No.
Those 40 incidents and the 16 incidents, is there overlap between those two groups? Are we talking about a total of 56 incidents?
I believe it would be, I'm not sure if all the incidents are unique, but the actions that were seen, there may have been violations of administrative policy and criminal acts in those incidents. So I wouldn't suggest that they're completely and totally isolated, but I'm sure we'll know more in the days and weeks to come.
Can you talk through your reasoning for going with this FBI agent? Did you reach out to any of the other local law enforcement agencies in the region? If so, what was their response?
We did, and we had some conversations. We thought, particularly for someone that was going to be doing criminal review and potentially bringing criminal charges, that as much independence as possible, so someone in law enforcement, but maybe not necessarily in local law enforcement or even around the state, but another level of separation would be important for the public to have trust and confidence that these were really going to be independent investigations.
And bringing up the separation, we've been told in the last couple of weeks, messaging is coming straight from your office, trying to set up interviews with the police department, even about like homicides or robberies. Even we've found records, social media posts, everything has to go through you in your office. Why is that?
Well, it's critically important, and as I think you've seen throughout the city's history, when there are natural disasters, other events that have taken place, it's absolutely critical that the information getting out to the public is clear and accurate. And obviously, as someone who reports directly to the public as the elected mayor of this city, I want to make sure that that information is timely, accurate, and complete.
But what we've been told is it's actually being held up, like social media posts for help on homicides that have happened are being held up because it has to go through your office.
I'll be happy to check into it. I'm not sure if that's accurate or not.
And so
Yes.
walk us through your decision to do that, and are you being a gatekeeper and keeping information from the public, as Lacey just mentioned, things like homicides and other things that are happening, and what is your vision? Is this a permanent thing, or is this a part-time thing? Would you have an end date to it? I mean, walk us through what you were thinking on doing that.
Well, I think it's critically important that the public hear the truth and they hear directly from me in my office about information that is of the public interest. And so wanting to make sure that whatever is being shared by the Division of Police, I mean, the Division of Police is part of the City of Columbus. It's not some separate independent organization. It's part of the City of Columbus, just the way the Department of Public Service and Utilities and Recreation and Parks. And if any of those departments or their divisions were in the midst of, the greatest social unrest that we've seen in 50 years, I would require them to communicate and coordinate with the mayor's office to make sure that the public is getting clear, accurate, and complete information.
Filtered through City Hall?
I'm sorry?
Filtered through City Hall?
Those are your words.
Right,
That's
but-
not accurate. So what I would say is that, as somebody who is directly accountable to the people of Columbus, I want to make sure that any information that's being shared by our departments and divisions is accurate, complete, and thorough.
So are you controlling the Facebook and social media for police now?
We are making sure that information that's being shared with the public is complete, accurate, and thorough. I report to the people of Columbus. The Division of Police is part of the Department of Public Safety. The Chief of Police reports to the Director. The Director reports to me. I report to the people. We need to make sure that the information is complete and accurate.
Mayor, had we not had the events of the past month, would you have done that, though? Had we not seen all of this unrest, would CPD still be able to operate with some autonomy?
Well, I think that, it's not an autonomous organization. You know, the reason that there's civilian oversight with the director and myself is that the people ultimately have oversight and control of the Division of Police. It's not some separate independent organization.
Right.
They serve at the pleasure of the people of Columbus, and I, as mayor, report directly to the people of Columbus. If your suggestion is that one of the reasons that we have changed our approach with respect to information and making sure that it's complete, that it's accurate, and it's consistent, that is true. I mean, as I mentioned earlier, if there were a natural disaster or flooding or other issues with other departments where we were in a crisis, you know, critically important time, we would be doing the same thing. And have, by the way, done the same thing in the past.
And so-
Yes, Ted.
Retired police, this retired FBI agent, someone, a Central Ohio person, or is it someone from outside?
I'm not able to disclose that right now, but
Will that person have a staff, and if so, a budget?
those are all things being finalized right now. But we're very close to announcing it.
And you mentioned that one way or another, we're gonna have a civilian review board, and you urged the FOP to cooperate or get on board enthusiastically. So is there a legal strategy for seating a civilian review board without the FOP's approval?
Well, there are a variety of strategies we're looking at, and what I'm calling on right now is for the rest of the community to step up and demand action from the FOP. I mean, what the FOP is still learning is that this isn't really about the FOP and the mayor or the FOP and the city. It's the FOP and the community. The community is demanding change. They want a civilian review board. They want accountability and oversight and change. And so what I'm telling the community is you need to tell the FOP that. You need to raise your voice and engage in advocacy for them to join this movement and be part of the change and reform that this community deserves. And so whether they're CEOs or United leaders of the nonprofit organizations, presidents of higher education, small business owners, entrepreneurs, this is not the time to sit on the sidelines. You need to be involved. You need to raise your voice. You need to be engaged. And collectively as a community, we have to put pressure and demand action from the FOP on joining this movement. Or the people of this community will hold the FOP accountable.
Mayor, how did you select the people that are going to be on this working group? I'm looking through the list here, and there's one retired police officer and a lot of other folks engaged in the community. So how did you come to that conclusion? And the FOP has said you will not commit to allowing them a seat at the table. Not having an active law enforcement officer on this panel would seem to support that you know they're not getting a seat at this table right now. What would your response be to that?
Well, I think law enforcement's perspective is very important. But the FOP is not running this process. They are not in charge. They're not calling the shots anymore about how we police, where we're headed as a community. And so we do have law enforcement expertise and professionalism, even within this department, that will be on this planning team. And we will continue to listen to folks from law enforcement that are committed to change and reform. But it was important for this group to reflect the diversity of this community. This is a civilian review board. This is not a police review board where they're simply going to be policing one another. This is going to be something that has been talked about in this community for decades, and critically important for us to increase the transparency, the oversight, and the accountability that the community is demanding from the police.
How did you select the people that are on the group?
Was
Was there an application process?
No, it was thinking about, folks that I've talked with, that I've visited with, that have been committed to this work for a long period of time, folks with different backgrounds, folks from the business community, the activist community, the nonprofit community. I think we have some folks from higher ed. I mean, it's a really diverse group with diverse experiences, including law enforcement. Yes.
Of those 16 incidents you mentioned that could result in criminal charges, what is the alleged behavior that could have potentially crossed that line into the criminal realm?
Well, it's clearly in law, and we can get you the specifics, the difference between administrative and criminal behavior, and I don't want to speak to anything that might limit or, not be as extensive as it is, but, clearly there are things that are against the department's policies and procedures. Obviously, that would be under administrative review. And then there are things that would rise to criminal acts, criminal activity, that would be a different standard. And so, as these investigations proceed and there's more information to share about the details, we'll be happy to share with you why some things were administrative and why some things were criminal. But that's the most information I can share with you at this time until they proceed.
Can you give any examples or anecdotes of what exactly is out of bounds? I mean, we've seen the videos come in that, we've seen the protesters yell at police, make threats at police. We've also seen the incidents that pop up where police have fired wooden bullets or have sprayed a crowd. So I think people at home deserve to know what exactly is out of bounds.
Well, I think clearly, if you understand our administrative policies, and we've even changed some of those policies during the last couple of weeks and determined that we couldn't, I directed the chief and the division of police to not use tear gas and pepper spray indiscriminately in large crowds to break up peaceful protests. That's a change in policy that's been made. So there are things that might, reflect that. But also things that would rise to criminal acts, outside of administrative policy and procedure that are in violation of the law, that we are going to investigate and review potentially for criminal charges.
Is there any weight given to those who wrote in support of CPD? Because we saw dozens and dozens of emails saying this was egregious, police shouldn't have done this, police shouldn't have done that. We also saw people who wrote in who said, I back the police, I can't believe you're not doing so.
Yeah, I think that, what you're going to find with these investigations, both by BakerHostetler and by this retired FBI agent, is they're going to be very thorough and they're going to be complete, and they're going to take into account all the evidence and information, not just people's perspectives and opinions, but what does the evidence and information tell us about administrative or criminal charges. Yes, Lacey.
Yes or no? Can protesters take over intersections like Broad and High or Front and Broad?
We are working with the Division of Police to do everything we can to allow peaceful, nonviolent protesters have their voices heard. But we've also been very clear about stopping of traffic and taking over intersections or using cars, surrounding people that are not involved with protests and threatening them. Those are all criminal acts, and we will intervene.
So is that yes or no?
Yes or no? It's not a yes or no. I mean, that might be a question. I didn't answer it yes or no because obviously peaceful protesters, we're encouraging them to stay on the sidewalk. That's the reason we bag the meters around City Hall, because the protests were saying we want to comply with staying on the sidewalk, but with these cars at meters, people can't hear our message or see our signs and hear our voices. So we bag those meters, and I think you've seen much greater compliance with staying on the sidewalk. Obviously, we need to protect nonviolent, peaceful protesters. We need to protect motorists. We need to protect business owners. We need to protect our police officers. And so anytime streets are being overtaken or intersections are being blocked by cars and creating an issue that's unsafe, our officers will take action.
Of those 56 total incidents that'll be looked at, are they all street level, on the street, quote unquote enforcement actions, or did some of them rise to the level of you gave a wrong order, you shouldn't have told officers to do that kind of thing?
I don't know. We can take a look at that and make sure we give you some accurate feedback. I don't know the exact answer to that question.
Mr. Mayor, I wanted to ask about a couple of things. One, I wanted to ask about last Saturday. Specifically, there was a protest calling for your resignation, and there was also a separate protest where people were holding up signs with allegations against officers. For some reason, that protest, which was quiet, became not quiet when officers came to tow several cars in the area that were, I guess, no parking in a no parking area. Can you kind of talk through that decision, what you've heard about it so far? And I also have another question about the body that you just impaneled. In this body or on the other, are there anybody that is under 30 or anyone who has directly experienced police violence?
I think the answer is yes to both of those, but I'll make sure that Robin gets you, if you're looking for ages and other information, we might be able to share that. I'm not prepared. I don't know every individual personally or know their age, but we'll make sure we follow up with that specific information. With respect to last Saturday and the towing of cars, police, again, have been very strategic and focusing on engaging folks earlier in the day about things that have happened previously that may be illegal, whether it's the illegal parking that was taking place around the State House and the City Hall, to ask folks to move their car to comply with the law, to make sure that we're doing everything in our power to keep our officers, our protesters, and the community safe. When that compliance didn't take place, there were some cars towed, and some of the cars towed have actually been involved in some of the criminal acts that Lacey and I were talking earlier about, blocking intersections and putting motorists, residents, and officers at risk. So that's part of what happened last Saturday, but if there are more specific details you're looking for,
video, and there were live reporters that were down there. That didn't seem to be the case. And from what I saw personally, the cars that were blocking the street were police vehicles and bike cops. They were not actual vehicles of protesters. Those vehicles were on the side. Now were
they illegally parked?
Well, they were illegally parked.
Okay.
They had the temporary no parking sign that had been placed on there. That sometimes they're there, sometimes they're not. They seem to be placed there when there's going to be a protest at City Hall, which I guess makes sense. But
yeah, I think the point that we were making earlier is one of the reasons we bagged the meters at City Hall was because peaceful protesters, we were telling folks to stay on the sidewalk. And when they were staying on the sidewalk, and as any of you have been around City Hall, they're generally surrounded by cars. And so they felt as if their voices and their signs and their protesting wasn't being heard because in essence they were holding their signs up to parked cars and yelling into parked cars. And so we bagged those meters to give them more room. And to make sure that their voices were being heard. So if you have any evidence, obviously, of cars that were legally parked that were towed or anything inappropriate, I'd love to hear more about it, and I'd be happy to follow up on it.
I think it's a question about the illegal or legal tow. It's the question of, did we need to bring bike cops and riot gear into tow cars? I think that's the question that speaks to this. Continuing yesterday's 6-hour hearing with the Finance Committee, I'd like to hear your reaction and the reaction of Director Pettis to the testimony from the community.
Sure. I think it's a very important conversation for us to be having right now. And one of the reasons I'm so committed to change and reform, because I still believe that we have a 20th century law enforcement organization, and I want us to become a 21st century best-in-class community policing organization. And so these conversations are critically important about why our officers have certain resources, what the benefit is to the community. Do we need to be doing things differently? I tell you what I came away with loud and clear, and I'll let the director speak if he would like. We need another way to respond to our neighbors in crisis, whether it's drug addiction, mental health, and I've even had some direct experience this with some friends, very close friends, whose family members have been in crisis. And all they've been able to do is call the police. And so I'm committed and want to work with our new director, fantastic new director of Adam H., Erica Clark-Jones, the county, and maybe other local law enforcement, for us to study, is there a better way for us to serve our neighbors in crisis? And it's going to take a long effort for us to be able to make sure we're building the bandwidth, we're getting the response that we need. But, should the first person on the scene of an individual in a mental health crisis be a police officer? And I think that we need to think long and hard about that in particular. And as I've shared with this group before, we may very well be asking way too much out of our law enforcement officers. And it's time for us to have a conversation about what the appropriate response is. There are many models around the country. I've talked about REACT here locally with fire and others, responding to calls for service for folks that have overdosed or that are in a crisis with addiction. And do we need to take that from being a pilot or a targeted thing to a wider spread community response around mental health, addiction, and so forth? Obviously, if there's a direct threat or violence taking place, we need to have law enforcement be part of that and be there. But do they need to be the first folks on a scene for a young person who may or may not be in a mental health crisis or a family in crisis and those types of things? But Director, you have any comments on the hearing from last night?
I'm sorry, what was the question?
I just specifically wanted your reaction to the testimony that was provided by over 60 Columbus residents, many of them speaking to the violence that they've experienced over the past few weeks and historically.
I was there for a while, and the hearing went until like 10 o'clock last night. Lots of individuals expressed their opinion. I can't comment specifically, particularly on cases that could end up in a disciplinary hearing before me, but I would suspect that some of them were covered in those 56 complaints that the mayor mentioned. 16 may involve criminal charges, 40 are being investigated administratively. There could be some overlap. If an officer is convicted of a crime, then if that officer does not resign, an administrative hearing will follow. It starts at the chief's level first. But there were lots of concerns that were expressed, and we will have to wait and see if the law firm will need to review some of those complaints and the information that was provided, or whether the retired FBI agent will need to review it.
Director Pettis, a question regarding COVID. We have heard anecdotally that a number of police officers have COVID, a number of them are in quarantine because of COVID. Can you talk about that? Not names of people because of HIPAA, but talk about how it's impacting the department. And is there any move for police officers to wear masks? Mayor, I don't know if you know anything about that as well, but we'd like to know, are they having issues with COVID in the department?
They have had some individuals that have tested positive, that have been quarantined, have been isolated. There were reports of officers who suspected that they had been exposed and went through the process as determined by Columbus Public Health and the HR department. It affected their staffing ability. They had to implement a different staffing model for a long period of time to make sure that we had officers unaffected by COVID-19 available to respond.
Was it in the EOC or other areas of the police department? How was it impacting staffing, and would that impact the community?
The reports that came to me was that most of the exposures were during their off-duty time. So we didn't have a lot of individuals, although there may have been some, and one of the reports was the EOC. I don't know what the magnitude of the suspicion of that was yet, but we're taking all the... Pardon me?
Do we have a number of officers, sir, that were impacted?
I don't have that information yet. The report to me so far was one officer, and that was reported to me last night. I expect to receive additional information today.
You could share that with us, that would be good. Any move to go to masks as we deal with the public? What do you think about that?
We talked about that in our HR department, and my HR administrator has coordinated with the chief. And so, yes, they are to wear masks when it's feasible for them to wear masks, but we have to allow our law enforcement officers to be able to use judgment based on the situation that they are facing. Just like they can pull you over and they can give you a ticket or they can give you a warning. They have to use their judgment when they are faced with a situation as to the level of vigilance that they need to apply in their response to whatever it is that they're facing. And for their safety, we cannot tie their hands and take away their flexibility and the ability to use their judgment in a given situation.
I'll continue to encourage that. Many of my interactions, I have daily interactions and briefings with the division, and the folks that I'm meeting with are doing their very best to wear those facial coverings and masks. We're going to be talking more about that work. As you know, we've formed a public-private partnership, Mass Equal Kindness here locally, and have been sharing that information, purchasing significant amount of facial coverings and masks, distributing them in the community, working with the Columbus Foundation, the United Way, and others, because it's really a two-way street. It's not just about our officers wearing masks and facial coverings. It's folks that are coming down to protest, nonviolent protest, but also our community members in the neighborhood. I mean, when we are wearing these masks, we're saying to our officers or folks on the front lines that we're interested in protecting you as well. And so it's a two-way street.
Mayor,
Yes.
do you know if there are any more directives that you see in terms of use of force? I know you talked about no more tear gas and limiting use of pepper spray. Are there any others?
Not any that is being contemplated at this time.
Okay.
Obviously, the Chiefs Advisory Council will be tackling some of the issues that I talked about earlier, dealing with nonviolent protests, large crowds, use of chemical agents, those types of things. So they may advise the chief very quickly in the next couple of months about changes that they think the chief should make to our policies and procedures. And as you know, he has the authority and discretion to make those changes to policy.
Well, that's what I was going to ask was, I'm not privy to the chief's schedule, but was he invited to attend today? And if so, or why is he not here? And what message does it send that he's not here?
I don't think it sends any message at all. Today was about civilian oversight and accountability. And you have the two civilians that have oversight and accountability for the Division of Police here talking about police reform and change. And so
We are talking about potential criminal charges against officers, so
Potentially.
it would make sense for the chief of police to be here. would it
my
not?
guess is you're going to see the chief, the director, and I together a great deal. You have in the last several weeks, and you will in the weeks and months to come.
Mayor, we've got a holiday weekend coming up. We know there are large demonstrations planned. We have seen in the past that there have been groups that have blocked off blocks of High Street and set off fireworks with no red, white, and boom this
Yeah.
year. And we've heard rumors that there are going to be fireworks brought down here to be set off. What is your message to these groups that are coming downtown and to the police officers who are going to be tasked with keeping both those groups of protesters safe as well as the people who live in this area downtown?
Well, there's no doubt about it. If you spend any time in our neighborhoods, and not just Columbus neighborhoods, by the way, I'm hearing this from Dublin, Upper Arlington, Grove City, Whitehall, throughout the community. And my guess is it's in communities around the country. And I don't know about you all, but I actually received a postcard selling fireworks at the house. You have folks that are now that aren't being able to sell their goods through these community events that are directing people on a personal level and wanting people to purchase these and use them at their homes, in their neighborhoods, which is very concerning. And that's why we charged Interim Chief Happ of the Division of Fire to lead a proactive communications and education and awareness effort. And we'll share more of that information with you. I'll have Robin send that information out because it's absolutely important that we're doing our part to help educate folks, help them understand the dangers and risks, whether you're using fireworks at home in your neighborhood or bringing them down. If you're coming downtown for peaceful, nonviolent protests, there's no need to bring fireworks. Fireworks have no role to play in nonviolent, peaceful protests. And so I want to be very clear with folks. We welcome folks exercising their constitutional rights, but fireworks, particularly in large crowds, but even in your backyard with your kids around, are a direct threat to health and safety. There's a reason that professionals deal with these fireworks, and we ought to keep it that way.
We're coming up on the deadline for the group for your recall to turn in their signatures. They tell me they believe they will have enough valid signatures to be put on the November ballot. Are you concerned about that?
I share their frustration, and I've heard the frustration of our neighbors and folks in the community who demand reform and change. And so we're continuing to take concrete steps, as we did today, to continue to implement change and reform, knowing that a significant amount has been done, but not nearly enough. And so we're going to continue to move with a sense of urgency on reform and change, oversight and accountability. I believe that the people of Columbus who ultimately decide these things in elections and other things, I will be held accountable. Did I lead and help implement the change and reform that I committed to when I ran for mayor? The chief, the director, will all be held accountable for what we get done and what we get accomplished. And that's why we have to move with a sense of urgency to get this work done.
And when it comes to demilitarizing the police, I want to know some of the specifics because the riot gear was brought up, like the Bearcat that the SWAT team uses, which are mainly protective equipment. Are you looking into things like the no-knock warrants and how that might impact the efforts that some of the units do with outside agencies?
Yeah, I think that council has laid out, is it 5 things that they're hoping to take legislative action on this month before the August recess. And so we're in communication with them. I will share with you that there are dangerous people in the world who are a threat to the safety and the well-being of the people of Columbus, and certainly our officers. And I am not going to stand by and let our officers be at risk or be endangered because they don't have the resources and support they need. I do believe that we can police differently. But the people of Columbus have been very clear with me. They want the police. We all need the police. We need them to change, and we need them to go about their work differently. And we need additional resources for folks that might be in mental health, addiction crisis and other things. There are better uses of police resources, and we can better make the police organization into a community policing organization if they're not trying to handle all of our community's problems by themselves. I think the hearing was a good thing. It's a good thing for this community to have a conversation, to talk about what their expectations are for policing. It's important for us to remember that there are very dangerous people in this community and communities around the country that we are asking the police to help keep us safe from. And so it is critically important to have this conversation, but critically important to keep our communities safe too.
Can you talk about the decision to employ a retired FBI officer to review these possible criminal charges? I mean, was there something in your all's review of these complaints that said, you know what, we need to look at this from a criminal perspective? And if so, what was that? And do you, as the mayor, have an expectation of some criminal charges out of all of this?
The importance is the truth. And wherever the truth leads us is where we need to be. That's how you restore credibility, trust, accountability, and transparency with the people of Columbus. So I'm focused on the truth. Why did I think this retired FBI agent was a better choice than maybe another local law enforcement agency or somewhere around the state? Because the people want to make sure that there's no connection, there's no, too much familiarity, on a local law enforcement level, that this retired FBI agent has the experience, the background, and the independence and the separation from local law enforcement to, I think, have the community have more confidence that the truth would be sought and that the truth would be shared.
Did you mention how much this is going to cost the taxpayers?
The independent, the retired FBI agent,
Well,
not.
And the law firm, yeah.
Yeah, we can share that. Once the contract's finalized, we can share those details on the retired FBI agent. And with respect to, do we have a number yet, Robin, for BakerHostetler? Not yet, but we'll share that as soon as we have that available.
Once his process is completed on the FBI side,
Mm-hmm.
does that go over to Zach Klein's office? Does it go to Ron O'Brien's office? Does it lead to a grand jury being impaneled?
It would all depend on what the criminal charge is, as you know. Obviously, the city attorney and the county prosecutor handle different types of cases based on the severity of it, whether or not they're misdemeanors, felonies. And so it would all depend on what the criminal charges were. And we may even contemplate an independent prosecutor if we think that will help reinforce and restore confidence and trust that truth will be sought and will be shared.
Is there any concern that as we go through that cycle, as we've seen before, where an officer gets disciplined, perhaps is charged with a crime criminally, gets fired by the department, then an arbitrator comes in and gives that person their job back? I mean, we have seen that come to fruition.
Well, I think that's the frustration of this community. And this is the frustration with the FOP, and it's why they have zero credibility in this community, is they continue to spend an indiscriminate amount of resources defending bad officers as opposed to protecting the overwhelming majority of good officers. And we have case after case where they have fought discipline, or in the cases when the director had made the choice to fire officers in the past. And this is why the public is so enraged at the FOP. And it has to change, and that's a broken system that we have to change. And the FOP has to decide whether or not they're going to focus on continuing to support and promote the overwhelming majority of good officers, or if they're going to join the rest of the community and demand accountability from the bad ones.
Is it against the current contract to hire this outside law firm? And if so, what would happen then? I mean,
No.
would we go to?
No, we've been in consultation with, city attorney's office and other folks, and
You
yeah,
don't need a sign off from the FOP
No.
with the current contract the
No.
way it is to hire either one of these?
no.
Is there a timeline for completion of these investigations, as well as, is the timeline for having this citizen review board still having them seated by the end of 2020?
Yes, to the Civilian Review Board. I would like these investigations to be top priorities for both, the law firm and the retired FBI agent. Obviously, depending on how complex and in-depth or how serious some of these criminal charges may be, they may take longer. But I want these investigations to be top priorities and want action, and determinations as soon as possible.
Are there any officers currently on leave within the department, to your knowledge, related to any of these investigations?
I don't believe so, but we'll check and make sure we confirm that. I don't believe so.
If there's a citizen who wants to be a part of the review board, is there an application process or how do they get to be a part of it?
Yeah, I think that's part of what we'll look to this work group for advice on, how we should go about that. What's the criteria we should be looking for? What types of qualifications and credentials are important? What type of process we should use? It's going to be a very, very important, high-profile board, and we want to make sure that we have a board that reflects the diversity of this community, but also has the highest standards in place to make sure that this group has the independence, the credibility, and the support to carry out their work. It is going to be very challenging work. There's a reason that this community, although it's been talking about a civilian review board for decades, doesn't have one. We're going to do this, and we're going to make it happen. And we need to make sure we have the very best that are seated by the end of the year. Luann, did you have one more question?
I did. I was curious about.
I think this might be the last one.
Columbus Police just tweeted that they are hiring police officers. My question for you and possibly Director Pettis is, in this climate, do you think that people will want to be police officers, especially our minority candidates?
Yes, because they see in this community a movement for change and reform, and a movement, again, going from law enforcement to community policing, and a 21st century approach to policing that I think particularly candidates of color, but I think people who are interested in serving and protecting all are going to be drawn to. What young professional wouldn't want to be interested in changing the culture of a division and to be part of building bridges to the community? And I understand it's a hostile, difficult time. I've talked to officers every day. African-American officers have been disproportionately on the receiving end with horrible, horrible things being said to them by folks in the protests, some of the folks that were interested in conflict and violence, calling them everything you can imagine. One of the officers told me in her 32 years that those were some of the toughest days ever. And this is an officer who has seen it all. So I know these are difficult days for officers, but I also know that this community is demanding change and reform. And I think for ambitious, dedicated professionals that are committed to serving and protecting all, this might be the exact place in the exact community that you would be part of. You think of the recommendations from Matrix, the Safety Advisory Commission. There is significant change taking place. For some people, they say not nearly enough. And then for some that don't believe any change should be made, that is way too much. And so I think we have to continue to move with a sense of urgency for a couple of reasons, Luann. First of all, it's the right thing to do, and the community is demanding it. But to your point, we will not be able to recruit and retain the very best and brightest from around this community, I would argue the state and the country, unless we really live out our values as far as change and reform. because there are departments that are moving that direction in other places around the country. Those are the types of officers we want in this community. Not the 20th century model, but the 21st century model. And that's why this change and reform is so important. We're going to continue to hire officers into the future. We may ask other folks to take some things off of the plate of officers moving into the future, but we need the police, but we need them to change. And I think that a dynamic, young officers who are committed to help us change this culture and make it a more welcoming place for officers of color, for women, for members of the LGBTQ community, I think that's a powerful thing and a great opportunity. Thanks, everybody.